we're very early in people using the Bitcoin blockchain for JPEGs.
Yep.
Probably the volume's quite low.
There's been 100,000 of them made in the past 3 weeks.
What if there were millions? What actually happens at that point?
We'll give it a couple months, but what happens at that point?
But can we get to the point where some people, can't even afford to open a Lightning channel?
I mean, what do you mean by they can't?
Well, it becomes so expensive. So say you're some like dude in Africa who's got like $50 a Bitcoin, and transaction fees are $50.
Well, yeah, but this is where Fedimints come in, and also using custodial Lightning services, or using kind of like the Galoy money where you have the Bitcoin Beach, where they have the one node that runs it for the whole town, right? You're going to have scaling solutions like that because each individual person was never going to be able to use Bitcoin's blockchain on the base layer.
So I'm not a fan of Fedimint, by the way.
Okay.
I'm really struggling with Fedimint because it sounds like to me we're undoing all the good things we said about not your keys, not your Bitcoin. I've just really struggled with it.
Well, this is an interesting conversation about scaling. Genuinely, this is actually kind of an artifact of the block size work, because the big blocker said, I want to be able to have every single transaction freely available so anyone in the world can pay very low transaction fees. And the other side of that said, we can't scale to a global money and store every single time you're buying a cup of coffee for 8 billion people around the world. So this was part of the necessary trade-offs of the fork wars. You were not going to be able to have everyone interact with cheap base chain Bitcoin. And this is what I mean about Ordinals is permanently changing how we view and think about Bitcoin. And this is a sea change narrative from the sound money narrative to whatever this new era is, because the blocks are now full. Block space is now being aggressively bid by people using it for non-monetary use cases. It's going to take years for us to fully wrap our mind around what does that look like from a Bitcoin security use case and narrative and how we sell it to others. It was just necessarily always going to happen. I think a lot of people thought it may have been 5 to 10 years from now, and it's just happening today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
We can keep going. Yeah. So the next step.
By the way, I might even be pro Ordinals.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrestle with it.
I'm just at a place of acceptance that this is all Bitcoin technical consensus, and I am not going to fork off the network. So I have to live in a world where these exist. That's where I'm coming down on it. There's you can't put this back in the box. I'm not going to run an or disrespecter node because it's futile, because all you need is the miners to continue including these, and somewhere around 15 to 20% of nodes not running that, and it's going to work anyway. Right? People may want to like individually delete some data off their own nodes because they don't want to hold the JPEGs. The problem then is you're not validating the whole transaction history, because you need to have all of that data sitting there to make sure it's a valid transaction. Is
there a scenario here where we're potentially bloating the blockchain within the rules, but to the point where the hardware requirements to run in a node become a little bit more challenging?
Well, we're going to probably start requiring like a 2 terabyte hard drive instead of a 1 terabyte hard drive. Do
we know how quickly that might happen? What is that, about 550 megabytes a day?
I mean, you've lost me.
4 times 144 blocks in a day is half a gig a day.
Yeah.
Times a year, that's 210 gigs a year.
So if
every block was max full, that's 210 gigs per year.
Okay, so every 4 years, another terabyte.
Yeah.
But that's pretty significant when we're at like 500 gig after 14 years or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's around like 650 or 700 right now. But yeah, it's
so in another 8 years, people might need a multiple terabyte drive.
Yes, but this is also where I think the actual real problem here was the block size increase with SegWit, which we don't have to get too technical into the details. This was seen as a compromise.
It was too much.
Again, and now we have 4 megabyte blocks if you use a lot of witness data, which is exactly what Ordinals do. So to try and bring this to the actual JPEG stuff.
Hold on, we shouldn't just skip over the fact that every 4 years, people are going to need another terabyte for their hard drive. And, and you may be in a scenario where people have got 1 terabyte at the moment, we're at 500 gig, and they knew they were pretty good for a few more years, and now in 2 years they're not. And then this might lead to a lower node count. Yeah. So, one, people are saying in Ordinal's community that not your node, not your JPEG. So if you actually want to hold on to your JPEG, you need to have a node, right? Because that's where the data is being stored. Additionally, I think the happy path, if you were trying to find some sort of brokering between the people who don't like Ordinals and the people that are enjoying Ordinals, is a block size decrease. I think that's the way you would be able to bridge camps in being able to. The Ordinals will continue to exist, but we're not going to bloat the blockchain as much with extra data. It gets tricky then, because then if you do that, large Ordinals
if people are trading these for value, they get kind of grandfathered in before the rules change, so they become worth more. So this is like the degen paradox Pete Rizzo was talking about. Like if you try to change this behavior, you're going to increase the speculative people that are trying to mint these before they get removed.
Yeah, and then my question would be, well, what now JPEGs? What next? Contracts, like all kinds of things could end up.
This is fascinating. Yeah,
which is interesting because it's like permanently etched in the Bitcoin blockchain. These things that people want to put in there. One of the could we find ourselves in? So let's go down a different scenario. Okay, it's starting to get bloated, starting to get really, really full. Things aren't getting in, and then there's a new block size increase debate. It's like, do we now need to go to 8 megabytes? Potentially discussion. And then how long do we get to a scenario where we start struggling with things like Ethereum has, where we have latency issues?
I don't think we're getting a block size increase. I think what's going to happen is
you don't, but think about it like this. I'm just mapping a potential scenario. The people we had on the podcast 4 years ago, if we have them on now, some of those people, they don't get a lot of listens, a lot of downloads. The audience has changed.
Sure.
Imagine we bring in hundreds of thousands, millions of new users, degens who love JPEGs. Imagine the miners start loving it. Imagine everyone starts thinking, oh, yeah. There's a big consensus starts, a social consensus. Yeah, let's increase the size of increase the size of the blockchain. And the old, less influential people who were always from the same set of principles, their voice gets edged out, and this newer group starts to be quite dominating. What if we do go to 18 and 16? What if we do start to make some of the mistakes of Ethereum because we've pushed so hard for this, as everything's changed so hard that we forgot the original principles? I'm just saying it's a potential scenario.
Understood.
And then we don't have nodes. We have people who are struggling to create nodes. We have Eric Wall doing Twitter threads on how he tried to create a node for Bitcoin, but he couldn't. We go to data centers. We centralize.
I think these are the necessary coalitions across Bitcoin that have to kind of remain vigilant. And I would say that the best way to price out all of the JPEGs is more base chain economic activity in Bitcoin for financial use cases, because they're much denser. Your fees go much further. I can send you $1 million for 25 cents, or I can spend several $100s for a JPEG. Right?
It's going to take time to get there, though.
Take time to get to where?
Like more dense economic transactions.
More people using Bitcoin. Yeah,
you can't force them.
But no, you can't force it. And this is back to Bitcoin not having any rules, right? I think that at this high level, we're just starting to kind of draw the lines of what this future space could look like. And for me, I think there's even if you have a bunch of people coming in and they're printing JPEGs and they want more of them, it gets prohibitively expensive as the fees increase. So as more people start trying to put JPEGs on the blockchain, the fees go up, and it gets harder and harder and harder to justify spending $500, $1,000, $10,000. As the Bitcoin price goes up and as the more demand is in there, you're going to price out a lot of the JPEGs, and you're going to have to be a lot more deliberate if you're going to do this stuff. And to your point earlier, it's more than just JPEGs. People are actually writing code and putting it in the blockchain as well. Someone made an Ordinal inscription, that's the JPEG stuff, which we will get to. They specifically wrote code that allows you to view inscriptions within the inscription. So they're writing code now that can actually interact with the other inscriptions. And I think you're going to start having people understanding and playing around, like, what is it actually to use this tech for? Not just pictures. I think pictures are just the easiest thing because it's what everyone already knows from the rest of crypto. But there's a really interesting opportunity now that this exists. What are other use cases? And I also want to just call it a really important point. For one of Casey's big motivations for starting this project was people were buying JPEGs on Ethereum, and users were being duped.
They were buying the hash.
They were buying a hash to a pointer sitting to an S3 server, or something like Arweave, which is its own token that has design flaws, because once the token falls below the price of cost of storage, people just turn off their Arweave nodes, and then the nodes disappear. It's like BitTorrent, right?
This is a real NFT.
So this is a real NFT. So for Casey's perspective, an inscription, which is this actual embedding of data on the blockchain, has to be endogenous to Bitcoin. The data has to sit there, because people are now saying, oh, what if I wrap my own token and I use the Ordinal stuff and I point it off to this other chain over here? It's not an inscription, right? You're trying to make pointers and references that don't exist on Bitcoin, and that's out of bounds. Casey doesn't want to support that. Most people don't want to support that. If it has to be endogenous to Bitcoin, so I can download a node and have it. And this is an interesting use case.
Can you stop somebody doing it?
Well, you never can stop someone from doing it. It's just kind of going to be, this is all social consent. Just like ordinals are all just a shared hallucination, these rules of like what are the rules are all shared. But also people are talking about now uploading like 3D gun files into a block. You can get that under 4 megabytes. You can actually have it so anyone in the world can have access to a 3D gun print.
Is that a potential self-own that we're asking for trouble?
Well, here's the other thing too, from a Bitcoin history lesson, people have been able to embed arbitrary data into Bitcoin since it began.
Yeah, but we're making it's a little bit more overt now.
Well, I mean, you're making maybe the barrier to threshold to enter easier, but ultimately this stuff always existed. People were using stuff in op returns. People were putting stuff in bare multisig. So they would make a multisig transaction on chain, but the keys were garbage. They were just using it to pump a bunch of data in there, right?
Has anyone put any child porn in this yet?
So not on the ordinal stuff that I'm aware of. I've heard stories that years ago, like 2013, 14 or something, someone may have done that. I didn't personally go to verify that and look for it.
Yeah.
So like why?
You don't want to do that.
Right.
But like, is that again a potential risk?
I mean, in the sense it's a risk that it's now on a node, and this is what everyone's been saying, that because it's on a node, then it becomes illegal to run a node because it has child porn on it. So This is where I would say that it's not like the literal JPEG is sitting there. So can I use this as an opportunity to talk about envelopes and inscriptions? So the way this actually works technically is you do a taproot transaction. And with this taproot transaction, you use Bitcoin's programming language called Bitcoin script, and you actually you do your send, and then you add extra data with something op false, mean not true, op if. And op if says, if the previous statement is true, run this code. But since it's op false, op if, your node skips over it entirely. It doesn't try to validate it because it's garbage data. And then you push a bunch of binary data onto the chain. So it's not like you literally have the image sitting there. It's in a very obscure format that isn't directly accessible. It's not like I can go to my Bitcoin folder and like see the images that exist.
So how do you see the images?
You would have to run extra software to actually parse through all of this binary zeros and ones to make it look like an image.
Isn't that just what computers do? They pass information to display a JPEG.
Yeah, I mean, computers parse information, but my point being is that if you just run a Bitcoin node and you're just using it for financial transactions, that just looks like zeros and ones, and you're never actually interfacing or interacting with it.
If I had this on my home computer, isn't it the same until I plug a monitor in? Like if my hard drive was found with child porn on, not saying I have child porn by the way, but if my hard drive said I had child porn in it, but I've had no monitor plugged in, isn't that exactly the same?
I don't think, because like the file exists somewhere on your computer.
I'm saying all the file is a bunch of ones and zeros itself. It's a computer that interprets it on a monitor.
But you instruct the computer to interpret that
by switching it on and opening it up. But the ones and zeros still exist.
Yeah, I think this is going to be something that is going to get fleshed out a bit more. I think
I'm just thinking.
My point being, though, that this already was available on Bitcoin, and I understand your point that it's more accessible.
Yeah,
I understand that. But
what about
this is not a new threat vector. This is already something that was there.
Yeah, but now it's more real. What if we have New York Times, Bitcoin blockchain, the new home for pedophiles?
You mean the journalists are going to keep being like disingenuous with their narratives? Well, this is just part of, we're Bitcoin is a movement to change the world's money, like in a very real sense.
Yes.
Right, it is.
It's a movement to change the world's money, not to change the world's art and JPEGs.
Yeah, it is. But my point being, it's an open pool, and I'm not the lifeguard setting the rules. So if people are going to use it for those use cases, I can't stop them from using it because Bitcoin is an anarchic system. I can't touch it.
No, I understand. I just feel it. I just feel sad about it.
I think it's something that we have to accept and kind of understand what the future state is, because the cat's out of the box. Like the cat's out of the bag. We can't change this.
What if it wasn't a JPEG? It was like a WikiLeaks file that's then immutable.
What's your point?
Like there's like stupid use cases and maybe more interesting use cases.
No, my point being is, are we now creating a place for self-own, a place for people to attack the network, to spam it with stuff, to put stuff that's not particularly like guns are illegal in the UK. Now it's a place where you can download, 3D printed gun things. I'm just saying there's lots of, there you go.
There you go.
I mean, this was from a long time ago.
Yeah.
But
this is my point. But like, also, I disagree with the word spam. If you pay the transaction fee, you're participating in the rules of the network. So be it. It's not spam.
Satoshi Dice played by the rules, but it was considered spam. And
People considered it spam. They were valid transactions, though.
of course, I get that, but we can post-rationalize anything by saying that. But at the same time, if we're trying to create the best money for the world, if we're trying to create apolitical money that makes the world a better place, I'm just not 100% sure this is a net positive of that or net negative. It feels like it's just swinging to the net negative for me, but I'm not anti it yet.
Yeah, I think it's net negative when you view it in the lens of the money narrative.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
And Bitcoin is it's like a hydra, a many-headed dragon of many things.
Because money.
Bitcoin's information that we use as money.
I mean, I consider it when the work I do is to communicate and educate people on why Bitcoin is the best money.
But this is what I mean by it being a narrative change, because this is a necessary narrative change in how everyone's going to think and talk about Bitcoin.
Why is it necessary narrative change? It's just I think it's actually
necessary is the wrong word, because it just like, I think this is the kind of like the impasse we have, is that I'm making an observation of how it exists and you're looking at it through a lens of it's an is ought problem. I'm saying this is, and you're saying it ought to be.
No, I think what I'm saying is Bitcoin moves slowly, very slowly, right? And this feels like almost like an accidental byproduct of Taproot that wasn't foreseen, and now we have it.
Yep.
And I think it's potentially unfortunate. And I worry about the attack vectors that come from this, that attack the network, attack Bitcoiners, attack its use case of money, and potentially take it down a road that maybe leads to more centralization. And ultimately, it might get to a point where Bitcoin fails as a project.
Well, let's take a step back for a second. We know the North Korean government has gotten Bitcoin and hacked it and used it for stuff. If we're going to apply a moral lens to this,
it's not so much a moral lens. A
narrative lens, like a narrative supremacy.
Let me tell you why I reject that. It's not a moral lens. It is a goal to create the best money in the world.
But then I go back and say, okay, so North Korea gets to use it to kind of perpetuate their dictatorship. Is that okay?
I'd rather not know.
What do you mean? Well, but not knowing doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You can't just pretend it doesn't exist.
But that's a byproduct of money. So if it's money for enemies, but it's still money. And, anything is a weapon. Anything can be a tool or weapon depending on how you point it, right?
Exactly.
You cannot create the best money without that money being access to other people. But if it's JPEGs and other weird shit that stops it being as good money, that is a concern of mine. And if it's something where we could see the entire shifted, like the narrative change, which means the old guard is out and new guard is in, and that new guard may be a little bit more Roger Ver style and eventually lead to blockchain bloat, centralization, because nodes can't afford to run multi-terabyte nodes, and we end up going down that. It's a concern.
So hardware costs trend down over time, and that's why when I was a kid, I had like a 8 gigabyte hard drive, and now I have a 2 terabyte hard drive in my backpack. Right, the costs in Moore's law, that stuff continues to scale. I think we also need to understand that Bitcoin finding this use case of like a decentralized hard drive that anyone can use. I got that from Junseth. It could be used for good too. You could have, there's now Tank Man images on the blockchain forever. People could coordinate dissident campaigns and oppressive governments using this as a decentralized hard drive, knowing that the government can never fully delete it.
I'm not even arguing against that. Again, I don't mean to be a dick about this, but I'm going to try and stay laser focused. Is it a net positive or a net negative for creating the best money in the world? That's my entire, everything comes down to that. Do we risk making this less good money by having it as a JPEG system?
I think this fixes the Bitcoin security budget problem for the long term.
Bitcoin it doesn't have a security budget problem. It
doesn't today.
Yeah, but but we don't know. Like that was a fear. Every Harvard, we don't know the price of Bitcoin in 4 years, and 4 years later,
this de-risks it.
Yeah, but this could always have been done at a later date. Saying
I agree with that.
Yeah, I'm saying Bitcoin does not have a security budget problem
today.
Today, it won't tomorrow. It's not going to forward. We don't know when.
We don't know.
And so what we're doing is we're trying to potentially fix a problem we don't know exists, that might never exist, with something that might damage it.
I think there was a genuine concern because of all of the unknown unknowns that 20 years from now, we may not have had, if you've barely people using Bitcoin, you don't actually have enough miner subsidy to protect the network anymore. A robust Bitcoin fee market was always necessarily going to have to happen for the health of the network. And what used to be the narrative was that we would get additional user adoption over time to bring more people on board to be able to protect that. Now we have a buyer of last resort of Bitcoin block space that will always be keeping that fee pressure up, which will increase the value of using Lightning, because if you can open up a Lightning channel, you can amortize the cost of your Bitcoin transaction over years and years and years of that channel. You do one transaction fee to open it, and then you're using Lightning for the rest of the time.
Fees are going up, aren't they? Every cycle. The amount collected in fees, both in Bitcoin terms and dollar terms. We did that with Sam Wooter, didn't we?
I mean, I think it depends on when in the cycle you pick. Maybe on average, though.
Yeah, on average. Yeah. So we don't have a security budget issue at the moment.
Yet. But a halving is like, if you want to keep it at parity, every halving, you have to double the Bitcoin price to be at place. And like, I don't think that's a very precarious place for this to continue working. The price has to double.
So we have to, for the next halving, we have to trend somewhere between base of 50, so 30 and 140.
Okay.
That's perfectly achievable.
But what if it doesn't?
And what about in 40 years' time?
Right.
Yeah, but you say
then another 4 years' time.
You're saying what if it doesn't? It's the same me saying what if a new guard of Bitcoiners campaign and get us to 8 megabyte blocks, and we just have less nodes.
But to the point of the price doubling every 4 years, it can't double every 4 years forever.
No, but it doesn't have to double every 4 years forever. It has to the fee mark has to keep increasing to a point where it's uneconomical to attack the network. It's been uneconomical to attack the network for a long time. Okay, so that's all it has to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to double every time. We might need like 3 more doublings, and we're good. But I find it a real hard justification for something that may be decades down the line, that we need something now that adds risk to this being the best form of money. That's what I struggle with. And so I always come back to my just very simple question. Is this a net negative or a net positive for creating the best money ever?
I think you should talk to like the pruning that might be available.
Yeah. So this is, the pruning point's good in that the witness data today, and this is talking about what makes it best money. Is best money part of it everyone being able to independently verify the entire supply of everything? Because today, if you use the Bitcoin default specs, you download it and you start running it, runs a flag called assume valid. So every 6 months, there's actually kind of like a stamp saying this is the, at this height, this was like the Bitcoin hash, right? It kind of gives you, make sure you're on the right path. You actually don't verify all of the signatures if you're running the default software right now. And with all of the inscription stuff, since it's sitting in the witness, it's something that's pretty trivial to prune out, where you can maintain your economic nodes for the things you care about. And if you're in the developing world and you don't have a big hard drive, you don't need a full archival node of every single Bitcoin transaction ever. Maybe what's good enough for you is you can validate the state and the validity of your transactions that you're holding and you're receiving. Right? This is an idea of being able to just focus on, instead of being the decentralized database for everyone to get a full sync from you, you just are looking out for, this is what I need to personally verify the quality of my money that I'm spending and the quality of the money I'm receiving. And pruning is a really great way to make it much more economical. So it's not just a 0 to 1. It's not a binary of, do you have a Bitcoin node or not? There's a whole spectrum in the middle. Yeah. And I think the fact that stuff is all sitting in the witness and can get discarded anyway, after a certain block height, you can just kind of throw this stuff away and make a security assumption saying 300,000 blocks have gone by. I'm pretty sure if someone was trying to pull something funny, a single node in the entire network would be able to call it out and end the whole fraud. So it's a very good security trade-off, is because you only need one honest actor to have the actual honest blockchain to be able to say, oh, that's an illegitimate transaction. That person doesn't actually have that money. And you as an individual, because you're going back to the use case in the developing world, you can just have your small node that validates everything that you need directly for yourself.
So do you think Ordinals and Inscriptions make Bitcoin better money?
I think that's a really big question. I would say that people that are speculating and holding on to rare Ordinals and Inscriptions, all this stuff, reduces the available supply out for trading, which makes it better money because people are having higher demand for it. I think on the other side, to your point about the runnability, usability of a node, it makes it harder to be decentralized because it increases the software requirements. I think I am still putting my thoughts around this.